The auctioneer's hammer hung suspended in the humid Kentucky air, waiting for one last bid on the broken-down mare that wheezed in the corner of the ring. Her ribs protruded like fence posts through her dull coat, and her left hind leg bore the telltale signs of a career-ending injury that had never properly healed. The crowd of buyers had long since turned their attention to the sleeker prospects being led through the gates, leaving only the kill buyers to cast calculating glances at the horse's weight. Ezekiel Thornberry adjusted his weathered John Deere cap and studied the mare through eyes that had seen 67 years of sunrise over the rolling hills of his modest farm. His fingers traced the edges of the crumpled envelope in his jacket pocket. His final Social Security check, meant to keep the lights on for another month. The bank notice stuffed behind it told a starker story. Foreclosure proceedings would begin in 30 days. Going once for $300, the auctioneer called, his voice echoing off the metal rafters of the Lexington Livestock Exchange. The mare, catalog number 847, registered name Windchaser's Dream, lifted her head as if sensing the weight of the moment. Her eyes, despite everything, still held a flicker of the fire that had once carried her across finish lines. Ezekiel had done his research in the truck on the way over, scrolling through bloodline databases on his cracked smartphone. This mare was descended from Stormcat through her dam side, with Northern Dancer flowing through her grandsire. Champion's blood coursed through her veins, even as her body failed her. Going twice for $300. The kill buyer in the front row shifted forward, ready to claim his prize. Ezekiel knew what came next. A one-way trailer ride to a processing plant in Mexico, where champions and claimers met the same inglorious end. His own small herd of rescue horses back home nickered in his memory, each one a testament to his belief that every horse deserved a chance at dignity, even in death. But something in the mare's eyes stopped him from simply letting her go gently. It was the same look he'd seen in the mirror every morning since his wife Cordelia passed 2 years ago, a spark of defiance against the dying of the light. $400! Ezekiel's voice cracked like a whip across the auction ring. Heads turned. The kill buyer's eyes narrowed as he recognized the old farmer, who'd been outbidding him on worthless horses for years. The auctioneer's eyebrows shot up in surprise. Nobody paid more than meat price for a crippled mare pushing 20 years old. I have $400 from the gentleman in the back. Do I hear $450? The kill buyer hesitated, calculating profit. Margins against spite. He knew Thornberry was land poor, surviving on fumes and stubbornness. $400 was already $50 more than the mare was worth by the pound. $450, came the grudging response. Ezekiel's heart hammered against his ribs. $500 would clean out his account, leaving him with nothing but hope and a horse that couldn't walk properly. But as Windchaser's Dream turned her elegant head toward him, something passed between them, an understanding that transcended economics. $500. The words left his mouth before his practical mind could stop them. The auction hall fell silent except for the mare's labored breathing. The kill buyer shook his head and waved off the auctioneer. In the sudden quiet, Ezekiel heard the echo of his late wife's voice. Sometimes the greatest treasures come disguised as disasters, Zeke. You just have to have faith enough to see past the surface. Sold to bidder $247 for $500 as the hammer fell, sealing his financial doom. Ezekiel Thornberry smiled for the first time in months. He'd just bought himself a miracle, or a very expensive grave marker for his farm. The trailer ride home seemed endless as Windchaser's Dream struggled to maintain her balance on legs that trembled with each pothole. Ezekiel drove with the careful precision of a man transporting precious cargo, though anyone else would have seen only a broken-down mare heading toward an uncertain future. Through his rear-view mirror, he watched her fight to stay upright, her nostrils flaring with each labored breath. His farm appeared around the final bend, 73 acres of rolling pasture that had been in the Thornberry family for 4 generations. The white rail fencing needed paint, the barn roof sported a constellation of patches, and the farmhouse hadn't seen improvements since Cordelia's passing, but it was still home. More importantly, it was sanctuary. Dr. Maverick Holloway, arrived within an hour of Ezekiel's call, his veterinary truck kicking up dust clouds as it wound down the gravel drive. At 34, Maverick had earned a reputation as something of an eccentric among the bluegrass elite, a vet who was more likely to be found treating rescue animals than million-dollar stallions, much to his father's disappointment. "You've outdone yourself this time, Zeke," Maverick said as he approached the makeshift stall, where Windchaser's Dream stood hip-shot, her injured leg barely touching the ground. His trained eye cataloged the damage: severe malnutrition, chronic laminitis in both front hooves, torn suspensory ligaments in the left hind, and what appeared to be old stress fractures that had never properly healed. "Can you help her?" Ezekiel asked, though he braced himself for the answer. Maverick ran gentle hands along the mare's legs, feeling for heat and swelling while she stood with surprising patience. "Her body's a roadmap of neglect and overuse," he said finally. "But underneath all this damage, there's still a horse in there. Question is, are you prepared for what it's going to take?" The rehabilitation plan Maverick outlined was ambitious to the point of fantasy. Months of hand-walking, specialized feeding, therapeutic shoeing, and treatments that would cost more than Ezekiel's monthly pension. But as the vet spoke, detailing cold therapy sessions and gradual conditioning programs, the old farmer found himself hanging on every word. "I can't pay you," Ezekiel admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. "Who said anything about money?" Maverick replied, his eyes never leaving the mare. "I've got a theory about this girl. Her bloodline suggests she was bred to run fast and far. Sometimes that drive doesn't die just because the body gives out. Sometimes it just needs the right conditions to resurface." They began the next morning. Before dawn, Ezekiel led Windchaser's Dream, whom he'd taken to calling Windy, on gentle walks around the perimeter of the nearest pasture. 5 minutes the first day, 10 the second. Her breathing was ragged, her gait uneven, but she followed willingly, as if understanding that this old man represented her final chance. Maverick arrived twice weekly with treatments that seemed to belong more in a human physical therapy clinic than a horse barn. Ice baths for the inflamed joints, laser therapy for the damaged ligaments, and carefully calibrated nutrition designed to rebuild muscle mass without stressing her compromised digestive system. The breakthrough came 6 weeks into the program. Ezekiel was leading Windy through their morning routine when she suddenly pricked her ears and broke into a shuffling trot, pulling against the lead rope with something approaching enthusiasm. It lasted only a few strides before she settled back into a walk, but the moment marked a turning point neither man dared voice aloud. "Did you see that?" Maverick asked when Ezekiel described the incident later that day. "Saw it and felt it," the old farmer replied. For just a second there, she remembered what she used to be, as autumn painted the Kentucky hills in shades of gold and crimson. Windchaser's Dream began to transform. The constant hand-walking had strengthened her cardiovascular system, while Maverick's treatments addressed the chronic pain that had defined her existence for years. Her coat developed a shine, her eye grew brighter, and most remarkably, her injured leg began bearing weight more evenly. But it was her spirit that underwent the most dramatic change. The resigned mare who had stood broken in the auction ring was being replaced by a horse who whinnied excitedly when she saw Ezekiel approaching with her halter, who pulled toward the pasture gate as if eager to explore what lay beyond. "She's ready for the next phase," Maverick announced one crisp October morning, watching Windy move freely in the small paddock they'd been using for her exercise sessions. "But I have to warn you, Zeke, what we're talking about now goes way beyond rehabilitation. We're talking about conditioning, training, and if my suspicions about this mare are correct, we might be talking about something that hasn't been seen in racing for a very long time." Ezekiel looked at the horse he'd saved from the slaughterhouse, now standing alert and eager in the morning sun, and felt a familiar stirring in his chest, the same feeling he'd had as a young man when he'd first dared to dream of something greater than his circumstances suggested was possible. The first time Windchaser's Dream broke into a full gallop, Ezekiel thought she might take flight. It happened on a crystalline November morning when the frost still clung to the pasture grass like scattered diamonds. He had been leading her through their usual routine when she spotted movement in the adjacent field, a deer bounding toward the tree line with liquid grace. Something primitive awakened in the mare's DNA. Her head shot up, nostrils flaring as she tracked the deer's movement. Then, with a surge of power that defied her recent history, she lunged forward, nearly pulling the lead rope from Ezekiel's weathered hands. For 20 strides, she moved with the fluid mechanics of a horse half her age, her legs finding the rhythm that had been buried under months of pain and neglect. When she finally settled back into a walk, both horse and human were breathing hard, but for entirely different reasons. Ezekiel's chest tightened with possibility, while Wendy's eyes held a new brightness, as if she'd just remembered her true name. "Holy Mother of Pearl," breathed a voice from behind them. Ezekiel turned to find Jasper McKinnon leaning against the fence, his grizzled face etched with disbelief. At 72, Jasper had forgotten more about training racehorses than most people ever learned. He'd spent 40 years conditioning stakes winners before retiring to a small farm 3 miles down the road, where he raised quarter horses and minded his own business. "Morning, Jasper," Ezekiel said, trying to keep his voice casual. "Didn't hear your truck. Walked over through the back 40, Jasper replied, his eyes never leaving Wendy. "Been watching you work with this mare for weeks now. Couldn't figure out why you were spending so much time with what looked like a pasture ornament." He paused, stroking his silver beard. "That wasn't a pasture ornament I just watched move." The two old men stood in comfortable silence, both studying the mare, who had begun grazing as if nothing extraordinary had occurred. Finally, Jasper spoke again. "You know what you've got here, Zeke?" "A horse that deserves better than she got," Ezekiel replied carefully. "More than that." Jasper's voice carried the weight of decades spent evaluating equine potential. "That mare just showed me a stride pattern I haven't seen in 20 years. The way she gathered herself up, the reach of her shoulder, the drive from behind, that's not rehabilitation, friend. That's raw talent breaking through." Over the following weeks, Jasper became a regular presence at the Thornberry farm. He brought with him decades of knowledge about conditioning programs, training schedules, and the delicate art of building a racehorse's fitness without breaking down their body. More importantly, he brought credibility to what might otherwise have seemed like an old man's fantasy. Under Jasper's guidance, they expanded Wendy's exercise program. What began as casual walks evolved into structured training sessions. They started with long, slow gallops through the back pastures, building her aerobic base while monitoring her recovery. Maverick adjusted his treatment protocols to accommodate the increased workload, using cutting-edge therapies to prevent the old injuries from reasserting themselves. The transformation was remarkable. Within 6 weeks, Windchaser's Dream had developed the muscular definition of a horse in serious training. Her neck crested with power, her hindquarters filled out with driving muscle, and her coat gleamed with the health that comes from proper nutrition and regular exercise. But it was her attitude that truly set her apart. This was no longer a broken-down mare going through the motions of existence. This was a racehorse remembering her birthright, attacking each training session with an eagerness that bordered on impatience. "She's ready," Jasper announced one December morning after watching Wendy complete a series of timed works over the farm's makeshift training track, a quarter-mile oval that Ezekiel had carved from his back pasture using a borrowed bush hog in sheer determination. "Ready for what?" Ezekiel asked, though he suspected he knew the answer. "To race," Jasper said simply. "Those times she's posting aren't accidents, Zeke. That mare just worked a quarter mile in 23 and change on a grass track that's softer than pudding, on a regulation surface with proper footing. Hell, she might surprise some people." The idea seemed preposterous. Windchaser's Dream was 19 years old, coming back from injuries that should have ended her career years ago. Racing was a young horse's game, dominated by 3- and 4-year-olds at the peak of their physical powers. What business did a broken-down mare have dreaming of competition? But as Ezekiel watched her cool down from her morning work, dancing, sideways with barely contained energy. He began to wonder if preposterous might just be another word for possible. After all, he'd already invested everything he had in this horse. What was one more impossible dream? That evening, as he sat on his porch watching Windy graze in the fading light, Ezekiel made a decision that would change both their lives forever. He pulled out his cell phone and dialed the number for Turfway Park, a small racing venue an hour's drive north. "I'd like to enter a horse in your claiming races," he told the racing secretary who answered. "Her name is Windchaser's Dream, and I think she's ready to surprise some folks." As he hung up the phone, Windy lifted her head from the grass and looked directly at him, as if she understood that their greatest adventure was just beginning. The backstretch at Turfway Park buzzed with the controlled chaos of race day preparation, but the arrival of Windchaser's Dream created an unusual stir. Seasoned horsemen paused in their routines to stare at the 19-year-old mare, being led from Ezekiel's ancient horse trailer, their expressions ranging from curiosity to outright bewilderment. "You sure this is the right horse?" asked Quentin Brewster, the track's leading trainer, as he watched Windy step off the trailer with the careful precision of an athlete managing her energy. "According to the entry sheet, she hasn't raced in 4 years. She's the right horse," Ezekiel replied, his voice steady despite the butterflies performing aerial maneuvers in his stomach. "Just been away from the track for a while. The claiming race they'd entered was hardly prestigious, a $5,000 claimer for fillies and mares, the kind of event typically reserved for horses whose best days were distant memories. The purse was modest, the competition uninspiring, and the betting public largely indifferent. It was, Jasper had argued, the perfect place for Windy to announce her return to racing. In the paddock before the race, Windy stood with the quiet confidence of a horse who belonged. Her coat gleamed under the afternoon sun, her muscles rippled with contained power, and her eyes held the bright intelligence of an athlete prepared for competition. 19, she was easily the oldest horse in the field, but age had brought wisdom along with experience. Jockey Colton Fairweather, a 26-year-old rider struggling to establish himself in the competitive world of professional racing, had agreed to take the mount more out of curiosity than confidence. He'd studied the mare's old race videos, noting her preference for stalking the pace before making one sustained run in the stretch. The question wasn't whether she remembered how to race. It was whether her rebuilt body could execute what her mind commanded. "She feels like a coiled spring," Colton reported to Ezekiel as they walked toward the track. "Whatever you've done with this mare, she's not acting like a 19-year-old. The field of 7 horses loaded into the starting gate with minimal fuss, but Windy required an extra moment to settle. 4 years away from the track had dulled her memory of the starting procedures, and the confined space of the gate made her momentarily claustrophobic. Colton spoke to her in low, reassuring tones until she relaxed, and they're off. The bell rang, the gates flew open, and Windchaser's Dream stumbled slightly as muscle memory fought against momentary confusion. For the first furlong, she trailed the field by several lengths while Colton allowed her to find her rhythm and remember the art of rating her speed in traffic. But as they entered the first turn, something clicked. Windy's stride lengthened, her breathing regulated, and she began the steady advance that had once made her a minor stakes winner. Moving with surgical precision through the field, she picked off tired horses one by one, never asking for everything, but gradually improving her position. In the stands, Ezekiel gripped the rail with white knuckles, hardly daring to breathe as he watched his investment make her move. Beside him, Jasper provided running commentary with the clinical detachment of a man who'd seen thousands of races, but even his practiced calm cracked as Windy swept into contention. "She's in third, second, she's got the lead." The track. Announcer's voice climbed with excitement as Windchaser's Dream hit the front with an eighth of a mile remaining. "This 19-year-old mare is opening up on the field, but racing at this level required more than just talent. It demanded the kind of sustained speed that could only come from a perfectly conditioned athlete." As the finish line approached, Windy's lead began to shrink. The 5-year-old filly Rosewood Justice, fresh and strong, launched a determined bid down the outside. In that crucial moment, with victory hanging in the balance, Windchaser's Dream reached into reserves that shouldn't have existed. Her stride never shortened, her ears remained pricked forward, and she fought off every challenge with the heart of a champion who refused to acknowledge defeat. She won by a neck. The small crowd erupted with the kind of spontaneous celebration reserved for truly unexpected victories. Even hardened horsemen found themselves cheering for the old mare who had just accomplished the impossible. In the winner's circle, as the photographer snapped pictures of the unlikely champion, Windy posed with the regal bearing of a horse who had never forgotten her nobility. The purse was $3,000, barely enough to cover a month's training expenses, at a major stable. But as Ezekiel accepted the winner's trophy, its modest size seemed irrelevant. They had proven that miracles were still possible, that age was just a number, and that sometimes the greatest victories came disguised as impossible dreams. "What's next?" asked a reporter from the local racing publication, his camera still clicking as Windy stood proudly in the winner's circle. Ezekiel looked at his mare, her eyes bright with the satisfaction of a job well done, and smiled. "We're just getting started," he said. "This old girl's got more chapters left in her story." As they walked back toward the barn, Windchaser's Dream moved with the confident swagger of a horse who had just remembered exactly who she was supposed to. The word of Windchaser's Dream's victory spread through the racing community, like wildfire through dry grass. A 19-year-old mare winning after 4 years away from competition wasn't just unusual. It was the kind of story that made hardened horsemen believe in magic again. Within days, Ezekiel's phone began ringing with calls from reporters, fellows, trainers, and racing fans who had caught wind of the impossible comeback. But the most important call came from Turfway Park's racing secretary. "Mr. Thornberry," came the voice on the other end, "I've got a spot in next week's allowance race if you're interested. It's a step up in class, but after what that mare did yesterday, I think she's earned the chance." An allowance race meant facing horses that had won multiple times, carrying more weight, and competing for a purse of $15,000. It represented a quantum leap from the claiming ranks where Windy had announced her return. Common sense suggested it was too much, too soon. "We'll take it," Ezekiel said without hesitation. The decision puzzled many observers, but Jasper understood the logic. "That mare's got momentum right now," he explained to a skeptical maverick during one of their strategy sessions. "Momentum's like lightning. You can't store it in a bottle. You use it while you have it, or you lose it forever." The week between races passed in a blur of preparation. Windy's training regimen intensified. Under Jasper's watchful eye, with longer gallops and sharper workouts designed to build on her returning fitness. Her recovery between sessions was remarkable for a horse her age. She bounded out of her stall each morning, like a colt eager for adventure. Media attention brought unexpected benefits. A local feed company offered to sponsor her nutrition program, providing the high-quality supplements that had been straining Ezekiel's budget. A therapeutic equipment manufacturer loaned them a magnetic blanket and cold therapy boots, eager to be associated with the feel-good story of the season. Most importantly, Colton Fairweather committed to riding her regularly. The young jockey had caught criticism for accepting mounts on older horses, but Windy's victory had silenced the doubters, while elevating his own profile in the process. The allowance race drew a field of 8, including several horses that had won stakes races. In recent years, on paper, Windchaser's Dream was overmatched. In the paddock, she looked every bit their equal. "She's filling out," observed Dr. Helena Voss, the track veterinarian, as she conducted the pre-race examination. "This mare's putting on muscle in places where most 19-year-olds are losing it. What's your secret?" "Love," Ezekiel replied simply, "and the belief that she's got more to give than anyone imagined." The race unfolded like a tactical chess match. Colton settled Windy in 4th position, tracking the pace while staying clear of early trouble. The fractions were honest but not blazing, setting up for what promised to be a competitive stretch drive. As they rounded the far turn, Windy began her move with the patience of a veteran campaigner. She angled to the outside for racing room, then accelerated with the kind of sustained speed that left seasoned observers shaking their heads in amazement. One by one, she passed the leaders, opening up a 2-length advantage with a furlong to run. But allowance horses don't quit easily. Lightning Pete, a 6-year-old gelding with 15 career wins, mounted a determined rally down the inside. Midnight Sonnet, coming off a stakes victory just 2 months earlier, charged down the outside. For a moment, Windy found herself in a 3-horse photo finish that could have gone any direction. The margin of victory was a nose, Windchaser's Dream's nose, thrust forward at the wire with the determination of a horse who refused to be beaten. The $9,000 winner's share of the purse was secondary to the statement she had made. This wasn't a fluke or a feel-good story that would fade after one victory. This was a genuine racehorse operating at the peak of her powers. In the winner's circle, the crowd was larger this time, filled with racing fans who had made the pilgrimage to witness something special. Windy stood for the photographs with the, composed dignity of a horse accustomed to victory, though Ezekiel noticed her nostrils still flaring slightly from exertion. "How high do you think she can go?" asked Vernon Blackstone, a prominent owner who had approached Ezekiel after the race with an offer to purchase Windy outright. "I don't know," Ezekiel admitted, one hand resting on his mare's neck. "But I'm eager to find out." The offer from Blackstone was substantial. $150,000 for a horse Ezekiel had bought for $500 6 months earlier. It would solve his financial problems, pay off the farm, and secure his future. But as he looked into Windy's eyes, bright with the satisfaction of another job well done, he realized that some things couldn't be measured in dollars. "She's not for sale," he told Blackstone firmly. "We're partners, her and I. Partners don't quit on each other." That night, as Windy grazed peacefully in her paddock, Ezekiel sat on his porch and contemplated their next move. The racing secretary had already called about a stakes race, a $100,000 event that would pit Windy against the region's best older females. It was another step up, another chance to prove that miracles didn't have expiration dates. In the distance, Windy lifted her head and whinnied softly, as if calling him to join her in contemplating the stars that wheeled overhead. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but tonight belonged to dreams and the horses brave enough to chase them. The Turfway Breeders' Cup Stakes carried a purse of $250,000 and a prestige that extended far beyond the modest track where it was contested. As the richest race in the venue's history, it had attracted a field that read like a who's who of older female racehorses, including Grade 1 winners and Eclipse Award nominees who had competed at the sport's highest levels. Among them, at odds of 12-1, stood Windchaser's Dream. The morning of the big race dawned crisp and clear, with autumn sunshine slanting through the golden leaves that surrounded the track. Ezekiel arrived before dawn to find Windy already alert in her stall, ears pricked toward the sound of his approaching footsteps. At 20 years old now, she had developed the kind of presence that commanded attention, not through size or flashiness, but through an indefinable quality that separated genuine athletes from mere competitors. "Big day, old girl," he murmured, running his hands over her gleaming coat. She leaned into his touch, the gesture of a horse completely at peace with herself and her circumstances. The pre-race attention was unlike anything Ezekiel had experienced. Television cameras documented their every move. Reporters peppered him with questions about training methods and future plans, and racing fans lined the rail to catch glimpses of the mare who had captured the sport's imagination. Through it all, Windy remained calm, almost regal in her bearing. In the jockey's room, Colton Fairweather was experiencing his own version of pre-race nerves. The stakes race represented the biggest mount of his career, aboard a horse who had become something of a national sensation. Win or lose, he knew this race would define his reputation for years to come. "Just let her do what she does," Jasper advised during their final strategy session. "She's got more tactical speed than any of them realize. If the pace is honest, she'll be there at the end." The paddock ceremony drew the largest crowd in track history. nearly 8,000 people, had made the journey to witness what many believed would be Wendy's final race, regardless of the outcome. Among them were racing luminaries, casual fans drawn by the story, and 3 generations of the Patterson family who had driven 6 hours from Tennessee after following Wendy's comeback on social media. As the field paraded to the post, Windchaser's Dream moved with the fluid grace that had become her signature. Her ears were pricked forward, her stride confident and economical. She looked, observers noted, like a horse who had been preparing for this moment her entire life. The race began with controlled chaos as 10 high-class fillies and mares sorted themselves out over the first quarter mile. Colton allowed Wendy to settle in 5th position, within striking distance of the pace but clear of the early scrambling. The fractions were swift but sustainable, setting up for what promised to be a memorable stretch run. Rounding the far turn, the field began to compress as trainers' strategies came into play. Midnight Glory, last year's Breeders' Cup Distaff runner-up, made the first move from the outside. Stellar Duchess, winner of 3 Grade 1 races, responded immediately from the rail. The pace quickened dramatically as the real running began. With 3 furlongs remaining, Colton asked Wendy to improve her position. Her response was immediate and electric. She surged forward with the kind of acceleration that defied her advanced age, moving from 5th to 3rd in a matter of strides. The crowd's roar grew louder as they realized they were witnessing something extraordinary. At the top of the stretch, 5 horses hit the front simultaneously in a wall of speed and determination. Wendy was in the middle of the group, matching strides with mares half her age who possessed impeccable credentials. For a moment, the outcome hung in perfect balance. Then Windchaser's Dream found another gear. It wasn't the explosive turn of foot that characterized younger horses, but rather a relentless grinding acceleration that wore down her rivals through sheer force of will. Step by step, stride by stride, she began to separate herself from the field. With a furlong to run, she had opened a length advantage. With 50 yards remaining, it was 2 lengths and growing. The wire couldn't come soon enough for her competitors, but for Windchaser's Dream, it marked the culmination of a journey that had begun in a kill pen and traversed every emotion known to the human heart. She won by 3 lengths, galloping out with the enthusiasm of a horse who could have continued indefinitely. The celebration that followed transcended normal racing protocol. The crowd gave her a standing ovation that lasted several minutes, while jockeys from other races came out to watch the winner's circle ceremony. Track management presented Ezekiel with a commemorative blanket and trophy that would have been appropriate for the Kentucky Derby. In the aftermath, as interviews were conducted and photographs taken, Ezekiel was asked the inevitable question about Wendy's future. The $150,000 winner's share had secured his farm and ensured comfortable retirements for both horse and human, but reporters wanted to know if lightning could strike again. "She's done everything I could have asked for and more," Ezekiel said, his hand resting on Wendy's neck as she stood quietly beside him. "From here on out, every day is a gift. If she wants to run again, we'll run. If she's ready to be a pasture pet, she's earned that right too." But as they walked back toward the barn, Windchaser's Dream pulled slightly against her lead rope, her attention drawn to the track where younger horses were already beginning their workouts for future races. Her ears pricked forward with interest, and Ezekiel could have sworn he saw her eyes brighten with possibilities yet unexplored. 6 months later, at the age of 21, Windchaser's Dream would win the Grade 2 Azalea Stakes at Aqueduct, becoming the oldest horse in modern racing history to capture a graded stakes race. But that victory, remarkable as it was, felt almost inevitable after what she had accomplished at Turfway Park. On quiet evenings, as Ezekiel sat on his porch watching Wendy graze in pastures that would forever remain theirs, he often reflected on the journey that had brought them together. A $500 gamble had yielded returns that couldn't be measured in any earthly currency. They had proven that champions come in all forms, that age is merely a number when matched against determination, and that sometimes the greatest gifts arrive disguised as disasters. In the racing world, where careers typically end before they begin, and glory fades as quickly as morning mist. Wind Chaser's dream had achieved something rarer than mere victory. She had achieved immortality. Her name would be spoken wherever horsemen gathered, her story retold to inspire future generations of dreamers who dared to believe in the impossible. And in a pasture in Kentucky, where the bluegrass grows eternal and hope springs as reliably as dawn, an old farmer and his miracle mare continued to write chapters in a story that would never truly end.